What if the people who threw you into a pit and left you for dead were the very people you were born to save? What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was not the end of your story, but the only road to the place where you could keep everyone you loved from starving? Almost 4,000 years ago, in the dry hill country of Canaan, the strip of land we now call Israel and Palestine, there lived a family of herders. They were not kings. They owned no city. They lived in tents of black goat hair, moved their sheep between wells, and buried their dead under trees. The father was an old man named Jacob. He had 12 sons by 4 different women, and he made the mistake that has broken families in every century since. He loved one of them more than the rest, and he did not hide it. The favorite was the 11th son, a boy of 17 with his dead mother's face. His name was Joseph. This story is not gentle. Before it ends, a boy will be stripped, thrown into a dry well, and sold to strangers for the price of a slave, 20 pieces of silver, about 2 years of a laborer's wages. He will be shipped 400 miles to a country whose language he cannot speak. He will be lied about by a powerful woman and locked in a royal prison where he will rot, forgotten, for years. He will be forgotten by a man who promised to remember him. And then, in a single morning, he will be shaved, dressed in white linen, and given command of the richest kingdom on earth. But that is not the climax. The climax comes later in a stone hall in Egypt, when 10 sunburned shepherds walk in begging for grain, bow their faces to the floor in front of the most powerful man in the world, and do not recognize that they are looking at their own brother. He recognizes them, and he has to decide what to do with them. This is a story about a family that destroyed itself, about a young man who lost everything twice, and about the terrible question that waits for every human being who has ever been wronged. What do you do when the people who hurt you are finally kneeling in front of you and you hold all the power? To understand what happened to Joseph, you have to understand how his family got there. His grandfather's grandfather was a man named Abraham who left a great city in the east because he believed one God, not the many gods everyone else served, had spoken to him and promised him a land and a family too large to count. Nobody around him believed this. Abraham had one son who mattered, Isaac. Isaac had 2, and the younger one, Jacob, cheated the older one out of the family blessing and had to run for his life. Jacob spent 20 years in exile working for a hard uncle, and he came home with 2 wives who were sisters, their 2 servant women, 11 sons, and a limp he never explained. Understand the wives, because everything hangs on them. Jacob loved Rachel. He worked 7 years for her, and the years, we are told, felt like a few days because of the love he had for her. On the wedding night, he was tricked in the dark and given her older sister Leah instead. He worked 7 more years for Rachel. He married her too. In that world, a man could do that. But a man could not make himself love 2 women equally, and he did not try. So Leah, the unloved one, gave him son after son, 6 of them, and named them like small cries for attention. Look, a son. Now maybe he will love me. And Rachel, the loved one, gave him nothing for years. When she finally bore a son, she named him Joseph, which means, may God add another. God did.
It killed her. She died on a roadside, giving birth to a 12th boy, and Jacob buried her under a stone marker on the way to Bethlehem and never got over it. Which brings us to the coat.
Picture a woolen robe, dyed in bands of color. The dyes came from crushed shells and roots and cost more than a working man could spend in a season. Cut long down to the wrists and ankles. Now understand what a garment like that says in a herding camp. Long sleeves mean your arms are not in the water trough. A hem at the ankle means you are not running after a stray lamb through thorns. It is the clothing of a man who supervises. It is the clothing of an heir. Jacob gave it to his 11th son. Feel it for a moment the way Joseph felt it. Heavy on the shoulders, warm even in the cold before dawn, smelling of new dye and cedar smoke. Now feel it the way his brothers felt it, standing in the same yard with dung on their sandals and lanolin grease worked black into the cracks of their hands, looking at the boy who would never smell like they smelled. They had spent their whole lives being the sons of the wife their father settled for.
The text says they could not speak a kind word to him, not one, not in years. And Joseph, to be honest, did not help. He was 17 and he had never been told no. He brought his father bad reports about his brother's work. And then he started having dreams, and he told everyone about them. In the first, they were binding sheaves of cut grain in a field, and his sheaf stood up, and all of theirs bowed down to it. In the second, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed to him. He told that one at the family fire out loud to everybody, including his father. Even Jacob flinched. Are we all going to come and bow down to you? Your mother and I and your brothers? His brothers hated him more, and they waited. If stories like this one, the real weight of them, the parts nobody puts on a felt board, are what you're here for, subscribe now, because we're going through the whole thing. And what happens in the next few minutes is where this family breaks. The brothers had taken the flocks north to graze near a town called Shechem, then moved farther to Dothan, days of walking from home. Jacob, worried, sent Joseph to check on them. Joseph said, "Here I am." He put on the coat and he went. They saw him from a long way off. On open ground, a bright robe is visible for a mile. "Look," one of them said, "here comes the dreamer." They said, "Let's kill him and throw him in one of these pits and tell our father a wild animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, panicked. He was responsible for the boy. "Don't shed blood," he said. "Just throw him in the pit." He planned to come back later and pull Joseph out. So when Joseph reached them, they took him. Hands on his arms, on his throat, on the collar of that robe. They stripped it off him. That is the first thing they did. Before anything else, they got the coat off him, and they threw him into a cistern, a bell-shaped hole cut into the rock to catch winter rain. It was the dry season. There was no water in it, just silt at the bottom and stone walls curving inward above and a circle of sky. Then they sat down to eat. That is the detail the text will not let us skip. They opened their food and ate bread while their brother screamed underneath them. Years later, they admitted it out loud. "We saw the anguish of his soul when he begged us, and we would not listen." While they were eating, a caravan came over the ridge.
Traders from the desert, camels loaded with gum and balm and myrrh, perfume resins and medicines, heading down the coastal road to Egypt. And Judah, the fourth son, had an idea that sounded almost like mercy. What do we gain by killing him and covering up his blood? Let's sell him. He's our brother, our own flesh. They pulled him out and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. That was the going price of a healthy young slave. Then they killed a goat, dipped the coat in the blood, and sent it to their father with a message. "We found this. Do you recognize it?" Jacob recognized it. He tore his own clothes, put rough sackcloth on his body, and mourned for years. His sons stood around him and tried to comfort him. All of them knew. Not one of them said anything, and their silence lasted more than 20 years, and it ate them from the inside the whole time. Joseph, meanwhile, was walking south with his hands tied. Egypt was not a country. It was a civilization, already ancient when Joseph arrived, already building in stone when his great-great-grandfather was alive. A ribbon of green mud along a river that flooded every summer and left behind soil so rich it fed millions while the rest of the world scratched at dust. Smell it. River silt, wet reeds, cooking oil, incense from the temples, sweat, animal dung, dust from the limestone quarries. Men shaved their heads and bodies and wore white linen kilts and painted black coal around their eyes against the glare. They worshipped dozens of gods and considered foreign herders unclean. They would not even sit at the same table to eat with them. A Hebrew slave boy was nothing there, less than nothing, a line item. He was bought by a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's guard, and put to work in his house. And here is where the story turns, quietly, without any miracle you could photograph. Joseph learned the language. He learned the accounts. He learned which grain merchant shorted the measure. He worked, and everything he touched came out right, so consistently that his Egyptian master, who believed in completely different gods, noticed that something was with this boy and handed him the keys to everything. Potiphar didn't even know what he owned anymore. He only knew what he ate. Joseph was maybe 25, handsome, the text says plainly. And Potiphar's wife noticed. Do not make her a cartoon. She was a woman in a beautiful house with nothing to do and a husband married to his career, and she wanted something that was hers. Day after day she asked him. Day after day he refused. And the reason he gave her was not that he was frightened of getting caught. He said, "My master has kept nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a terrible thing and sin against God?" That was the whole argument. Not, "Someone will find out." Not, "This is dangerous." But, "There is a God, and he sees, and I will not." One afternoon the house was empty, and she caught his garment in her fist. He pulled away and ran, and the cloth stayed in her hand. For the second time in his life, they took his clothes. She screamed. She held up the linen as proof and told the household the Hebrew slave had attacked her, and then told her husband the same thing. And Potiphar threw Joseph into the king's prison, a place under the ground. And the text mentions, almost in passing, that they put his feet in irons. Think about what that does to a mind. He had done the right thing. He had done the hard, expensive, unwitnessed right thing, and it cost him everything he had rebuilt.
There is no record of him praying in that cell. There is no angel. There is only the same slow, stubborn pattern. He got up and he made himself useful, and the warden started handing him keys because that is who he was, even when it had never once paid. Then 2 men were thrown in with him. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, the man who tasted the king's wine, and his chief baker. Both had angered the king. Both, on the same night, had strange dreams and woke up sick with dread. Joseph saw their faces in the morning and asked why they looked so bad. They said, "We dreamed, and there's nobody to tell us what it means." In Egypt, dream interpretation was a licensed profession, a priestly art with manuals and fees, and they had none of that in a cell. Joseph said, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me." The cupbearer's dream meant restoration in 3 days. The baker's meant execution in 3 days. Both came true exactly. And as the cupbearer was walking out into the sunlight, Joseph asked him for one thing. "Remember me. Mention my name to Pharaoh. I was kidnapped from my country, and I have done nothing to deserve this hole." The cupbearer did not remember him. He forgot him completely. 2 more years. Sit in that with him. 2 years of hearing footsteps in the corridor and thinking, this is it. 2 years of watching the light move on the wall. He was a slave in a foreign country with a criminal record, no family, no property, no name, and no reason left to believe the dreams of a spoiled 17-year-old had ever meant anything at all. Then Pharaoh dreamed. 7 fat cows came up out of the Nile, and 7 starved, ugly cows came up after them and ate the fat ones and stayed as thin as before. Then 7 full heads of grain on one stalk, and 7 thin heads shriveled by the desert wind, and the thin ones swallowed the full ones. He woke up shaking. He called every magician and wise man in Egypt. Nobody could tell him a thing. And the cupbearer, standing by the throne with the wine, went pale and said, "I have to confess something. I forgot a man." They ran to the prison. They shaved him. Egyptians could not present a bearded foreigner to the king. And they gave him clean clothes, and they brought him up out of the ground and into the throne room, and for the 3rd time in his life, someone changed what Joseph was wearing to change what he was. Pharaoh said, "I have heard you can interpret dreams." Joseph, 30 years old, standing in front of a man his whole world considered a living god, said, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer." 7 years of unbelievable harvest, he told him. Then 7 years of famine so total that the good years will be forgotten. The dream came twice because it is settled and it is coming soon. Now find a wise man, take 1/5 of every harvest for 7 years, and store it. There was a silence in that room. Then Pharaoh looked at his officials and said, "Can we find anyone else like this? A man who has the Spirit of God in him?" He took the signet ring off his own finger, the ring that stamped the royal seal on documents and made them law, and put it on Joseph's hand. Fine linen. A gold chain around his neck. The 2nd chariot in the kingdom, with runners going ahead of it shouting for people to kneel. A new Egyptian name. An Egyptian wife, the daughter of a priest. The slave was the governor of Egypt by nightfall.
For 7 years, the harvests came in so heavy they stopped keeping records. He built granaries in every city, mud brick vaults packed with grain, and his officials collected a fifth of everything. He had 2 sons. The names he chose tell you what was still bleeding in him. The first he called Manasseh, which sounds like the Hebrew word for forgetting. And he said, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's house." The second he called Ephraim, from the word for fruitful. "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." He was trying to amputate his past. You can hear it. Let me forget them. Let this be enough. Then the rain failed, not just in Egypt, everywhere. In Canaan, the wells dropped, the barley came up thin, the sheep died. And a very old man in a tent in the hills heard that there was grain in Egypt and told his sons to stop staring at each other and go buy some. 10 of them went. He kept the youngest home, Benjamin, Rachel's other son, the only piece of her he had left. They came into the hall of the governor of Egypt with their faces to the floor. 10 men, sunburned, dressed like shepherds, smelling of goats in a room that smelled of incense. Joseph knew them instantly. They did not know him. Why would they? They had sold a boy. This was a clean-shaven Egyptian lord in linen and gold, speaking through an interpreter, surrounded by armed men. 22 years had passed, and in that moment, the sheaves bowed down. He did not tell them who he was. Instead, he did something strange and hard and, if we are honest, not entirely clean. He accused them of being spies. He threw them in a cell for 3 days. He kept one brother, Simeon, in chains and sent the rest home with grain and orders. "Bring me your youngest brother, or you will never see my face again." Why? Part of it was that he had to know. Had they done to Benjamin what they did to him? Was there anything left in them? And part of it, we should admit, was that he was a man with absolute power standing in front of the people who had ruined his life, and he was not made of stone. He heard them talking among themselves in Hebrew, not knowing he understood every word. "We are guilty about our brother. We saw his distress when he begged us, and we would not listen. That is why this is happening to us." Joseph turned around and walked out of his own throne room so they would not see his face come apart. At home, Jacob refused. "You took Joseph. Simeon is gone. Now you want Benjamin? Everything is against me." But the grain ran out, and hunger does not negotiate. And finally Judah, the one who had said sell him, stood in front of his father and said, "Send the boy with me. I will be responsible for him. If I don't bring him back, blame me for the rest of my life." They went back, Benjamin with them. Joseph saw his mother's face on a young man across the room and had to leave again to weep in a private room. Then washed and came back out and said calmly, "Serve the food." He seated them by age, oldest to youngest, and watched them look at each other in confusion. He gave Benjamin 5 times as much as anyone else. He watched to see if the old jealousy would move in their faces. Then he set the trap. He had his steward hide his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and the next morning, on the road, soldiers rode them down and found it. They could have run. They had the grain. It would have been so easy.
The boy is a thief, that's his problem. We did nothing. It was exactly the same choice, offered a second time. Sacrifice Rachel's son and go home to the old man with a story. Instead, they tore their clothes, every one of them, and turned the donkeys around and went back. They fell on the floor of the hall. Joseph said, "Only the one who had the cup will stay as my slave. The rest of you, go home in peace." And Judah stood up. He came close, close enough that the guards must have moved, and he told the whole story to a man he thought was a stranger. "We have a father, an old man. He had 2 sons by the wife he loved. One of them is gone. He was torn to pieces, and our father has never recovered. If we come home without this one, he will die. His life is tied to the boy's life, so let me stay instead. Take me as your slave and let the boy go back to his father, because I cannot watch what this would do to him." Judah, who had sold a brother for silver, was offering to spend the rest of his life in chains to save Rachel's other son and spare an old man's heart. Joseph could not hold it. "Get everyone out," he said. "Every Egyptian out." And when the room was empty, he broke, and he wept so loudly that the servants heard it through the walls, and the news went straight to Pharaoh's house. He said in Hebrew, in his own voice, for the first time in 22 years, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" They could not answer him. They could not move. The text says they were terrified in front of him, and of course they were. Everything they had buried for 2 decades was standing in front of them wearing the ring of Egypt. "Come here," he said. "Come close. I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. Now don't be angry with yourselves. Don't be crushed. God sent me ahead of you to save your lives. There have been 2 years of famine, and there will be 5 more, and God sent me here to keep you alive." He put his arms around Benjamin, and they both wept. And then he kissed every one of them, all 10, the ones who had held him down, and wept on them. And only then were they able to speak to him. And when he sent them home to fetch their father, he gave each of them a gift: clothes, new garments, 1 set for every brother, and 5 for Benjamin. Think about what that is. The last time these men and this coat were in a room together, they were tearing it off his back and soaking it in goat's blood. Now the boy they stripped is standing in a palace, putting robes onto their shoulders with his own hands, and the wagons are being loaded, and he is sending them home dressed like men who belong to somebody. They came into the camp in Canaan shouting before they were off the donkeys, "Joseph is alive. He is the ruler of all Egypt." The old man's heart went still. He did not believe them. And then he saw the wagons coming up the road, Egyptian wagons, loaded, more than a shepherd family could dream of. And something came back into him that had been dead for 22 years, and he said, "It's enough. My son is alive. I'll go and see him before I die." They met on the road in Goshen. Joseph came in his chariot, and when he saw his father, he did not stand on ceremony. He fell on his neck and wept there a long time. Jacob lived 17 more years, long enough to hold Joseph's Egyptian sons on his knees. And when he died and was buried in Canaan beside Abraham and Isaac, the brothers panicked all over again.
Now he'll do it. Now that Dad's gone, now he'll pay us back. Joseph wept when he heard they still thought that. Don't be afraid, he said. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to keep many people alive as it is today.
Here is what that story is doing, and why people have not been able to put it down for 35 centuries. Joseph never says the pit was fine. He never says his brothers were secretly kind, or that the prison was a blessing in disguise, or that the woman who lied about him did him a favor. He looks at 10 men who did an unforgivable thing, and he calls it exactly what it was. You meant evil. He does not soften a syllable of it. And then he says something almost impossible. God meant it for good. Not instead of their evil, underneath it, through it. God was building a rescue out of the very materials they used to destroy him, and neither they nor Joseph could see it while it was happening. The pit was a road. The false accusation put him in the one prison in Egypt where he would meet the one man who worked in the palace. Every single door that slammed was moving him toward a granary that would keep his family, and a whole region, from starving to death.
He could not see it at 17 with mud on his face. He could not see it at 28 with irons on his ankles. He only saw it looking backward. That is usually how it works. And centuries later, there was another son loved by his father, sent out to his brothers, hated for what he said about who he was. He was sold for silver by one of his own. They stripped his clothes off him and gambled over them. He was condemned, though he had done nothing, and put in the ground. And he came up out of that grave with all authority, and the first thing he did was find the people who abandoned him, and he did not come back for revenge. He came back with bread. Everything Joseph was is a shadow pointing at Jesus, who could say over every hand that ever struck him, "You meant it for evil, and God meant it to save many people alive." So hear this where you actually are. Maybe you are in the pit right now, and the sky is a small circle a long way up. Maybe you did the right thing, the costly, invisible, nobody clapped right thing, and it made your life worse, not better. Maybe you are in the forgotten years, the ones between the promise and anything that looks like it, and the person who swore they would remember you has not called. You are not being punished. You are not off the map. The years the cupbearer forgot you were not wasted years. They were the years the granaries were being built. And if you are the one holding the power over someone who wronged you, look hard at Joseph in that emptied room, sobbing so loudly the palace heard it, pulling the men who sold him into his arms and putting new clothes on their backs. Forgiveness is not pretending the pit did not happen. It is refusing to be the next person who throws someone in. Your Father knows where you are. He has not lost the thread. And the very thing you are begging him to take away may be the road to the only place you can do the thing you were made for. If this reached you today, subscribe and stay with us. There are more of these stories coming, and the next one is waiting for you.